Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 30th, 2024. It has been 3,899 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 222 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 219 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 56 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened over the weekend and on Monday morning. Our Russia-Ukraine war map is a great companion to the podcast, and there is a link in the podcast description. There are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. We are unsure if the current operational tempo is new normal, or if Moscow is attempting to advance as far as possible before fall weather arrives. We maintain that the current operational tempo is unsustainable, and at some point the operational tempo will decline. 2. Continued nuclear threats from Moscow highlight how the world remains caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 3. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies and international organizations to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 4. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. The continued attacks are increasing the probability of a nuclear accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants due to a loss of external power connections. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States is a complete failure that has only encouraged Russia to escalate hybrid and kinetic warfare actions against the NATO alliance and Ukraine's allies and their economic interests. 6. We maintain that autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 15th is unrealistic and highly unlikely. 7. In our assessment, it is equally unlikely that Russian forces will capture Donetsk, New York, Mirnograd, Pokrovsk, and Selidovo by October the 15th. 8. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. 9. In our assessment, there could be a shift in Washington's policy toward Ukraine's request for deep strikes within Russia after the November the 5th national elections in the United States. Russia significantly increased its attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure over the weekend. On Friday, a police station in Kryvyi Rih in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast was hit by a missile, destroying the building. 4 people were killed and at least 3 wounded. On Saturday, Russian attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure killed at least 16 and wounded at least 52. A Russian missile struck a closed children's sanatorium in the Odessa region, causing significant damage. No injuries were reported. On Sunday, a Russian missile struck Zaporizhzhia, almost leveling an apartment building near the Security Service of Ukraine offices and the central hospital of the Zaporizhzhia district. In the Grand Shopping Center, several shops had their ceilings collapsed and windows blown out. The attack wounded 16 and briefly knocked out rail service from Zaporizhzhia Station No. 1. 2 women remain in hospital, 1 in critical condition. On Sunday, 4 civilians were killed and 21 injured, including the previously mentioned attack on Zaporizhzhia. Overnight, a Shahed 136 one-way drone damaged critical civilian infrastructure in Mykolaiv. No other information was available. Since September the 1st, Russia has launched 1,335 Shahed 136 one-way drones at Ukraine, almost double the record of 785 set in August. It is unclear if Russia has doubled its production capacity in the last 2 to 3 months, or if Moscow accumulated a supply to carry out a surge with the approach of Ukraine's winter. There were more attacks over the weekend, and I'll cover those in the War Crimes and Human Rights section. From Friday to Sunday, Russia carried out 498 discrete assaults, including 153 on Sunday. Through September the 29th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 167. Over the previous 7 days, Russia carried out 1,171 attacks, a more than 10% decrease from the previous week. We maintain that the current operational tempo is unsustainable. Further, Ukrainian forces are outperforming their expected capabilities when considering the record-setting operational tempo in September. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,046 square kilometers, with another 254 in the grey zone, for a total area of 1,300 square kilometers. Before I start going through the weekend action report, this would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in northeastern Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. After a relatively quiet couple of weeks, there was a lot more activity in the Kursk region of Russia. Starting in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or EO, satellite images and a Russian video showed increasing military activity in the Tyotkina-Budke-Bassalivka triangle on the Russian side of the border. New craters caused by combat activity were noted on September the 15th and the 20th. On September the 25th, combat-related fires burned north to south, reaching the second echelon of the Russian-controlled Prigozhin line east to Tyotkina. Because the Ukrainian Air Force frequently conducts airstrikes on Tyotkina, we cannot determine which combatant is on the offensive in the area. Russia conducted artillery strikes on both sides of the border near Budke, Holishevska, and the closed border checkpoint southeast of Tyotkina. A week ago, I told you about how satellite images suggested Ukrainian forces were flanking Russian troops in Veselaya. Now there is proof. Video showed Ukraine carrying out an armored assault west and northwest of Veselaya, reaching the last ground line of communication, or GLOC, that's a supply line, supporting the Russian garrison. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, carried out airstrikes in Obukhovka, that one in the Glushkovsky district, and east of the village. A large formation of Russian light infantry attempting to advance on foot toward the village was hit by multiple rounds of cluster munitions and suffered significant casualties. We'll link to that video also. The Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armored, claimed airstrikes near Novy Put destroyed a tank and 4 infantry mobility vehicles, killing up to 50 Ukrainian troops, and fighting was ongoing at the village with almost no supporting evidence. The very low-quality video did not show what was targeted by the airstrikes or provide a battle damage assessment. A Ukrainian Leopard 2A4 main battle tank that was recovering a T-72 MBT was struck by a drone in the village. The tank's automatic fire suppression system prevented significant damage, and the Leopard continued on its own power. In our assessment, if Ukraine is recovering damaged vehicles in Novy Put, it is highly unlikely there will be ongoing fighting in the immediate area. Russian mercenary mill blogger Rybar also expressed a doubt about the report from the Kremlin. Armored reported their forces shelled and carried out airstrikes on Medvezhye, confirming that Ukrainian forces are still operating in the area. In the Korenevo EO, Russian sources provided mixed information, reporting Ukraine and Russia were conducting offensive operations. the line of conflict southwest of Nikolaevo-Daryina was clarified, with Russian troops up to 1,000 meters further east than previously assessed. Armored reported fighting in the area of Daryina and artillery attacks and airstrikes on Nikolaevo-Daryina and Tolstoy Lug. NASA Fire Information for Resource Management Systems suggested fighting continued in Obuchovka, the one near Korenevo. Armored and Russian mercenary mail blogger Rybar reported fighting continued in the area of Lyubimovka, with Ukrainian forces on the offensive. A Ukrainian military truck, likely carrying ammunition, was destroyed by a drone east of Korenevo village, where Russian forces gained control at the beginning of the month. Due to the location and the direction of travel, the area under Ukrainian control was expanded west. Multiple Russian sources reported fighting continued in the area of Volgovka. Russia released videos of the VKS carrying out airstrikes south of Krymiana, revealing that Ukrainian forces were further north than assessed, or shrinking the Russian encirclement. Rybar reported that Ukrainian forces were on the offensive in the area of the settlement. In the Belitsa AO, Armad claimed there was fighting in the area of Plekhovo, which was also attacked by artillery and airstrikes. Rybar wrote that the contact line remains static and, quote, reports of attacks by Ukrainian formations in the same area. A video released today showed a Russian assault involving at least a company of armor supported by up to a company of light infantry attempting to reach Plekhovo from the south on September the 16th or 17th. The Russian attack ended in failure. Supported by at least 4 total tanks and armored vehicles, the Russian advance was hampered by sections of the Prigozhin line under Ukrainian control. All 4 total tanks and at least 6 other armored vehicles were destroyed. Russian troops tried to take shelter in the anti-tank ditches and were repeatedly attacked by FPV one-way drones, suffering significant losses. We link to the video in today's situation report. There's more information in the podcast description.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is what's happening in my home of Ukraine. Starting in the Kharkiv region, let's begin in Vovchansk, where Ukrainian forces are making slow but steady gains after liberating the remains of the machine aggregate plant. The VKS bombed the bridge over the Oskil River at Osynovo using a tactical Kh-38ML missile. The main Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or GUR, provided detailed information about the assault that cleared the Russian garrison from the factory compound. 80 soldiers from the 45th Guards Air Assault Brigade from Kubinka, Moscow, remained in the Russian garrison, with around 20 taken prisoner. The Russian garrison couldn't be adequately supplied, and when logistics collapsed, reportedly they were forced to eat dogs and dug a well in one of the building basements to get groundwater. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian losses from last week's failed armored assault from Peshchane have been verified, as well as the new line of conflict. Russian forces were pushed back up to 1,000 meters from Kolesnikivka. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, reported assaults in the direction of Kucherevka, Kruglякivka, Novoosinovo and Lozova were unsuccessful. Further south, in the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatovo, the only fighting was in the occupied Zherelne area, where Russian forces unsuccessfully tried to advance toward Vyshneva. West of Kremenna, Ukrainian forces are maintaining their new defensive lines on the outskirts of occupied Makiivka, and Russian advances from Nevske were contained. Russian attempts to advance between Torske and Yampolivka in the direction of Zarychne were also unsuccessful. GSAFU reported fighting occurred in the Serebryansky forest. The heaviest fighting continued in the Donbas region from Donetsk to Vuhledar. In the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast near Siversk, GSAFU reported fighting near Bilogorivka, the one in the Luhansk Oblast, and west of Zolotarivka. In the Kostantinivka AO, Russian forces carried out an unsuccessful mechanized assault in the direction of Minkivka on the E40 highway, suffering significant losses. We link to the video showing the failed assault. Fighting continued on the western edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar. Video showed that Russian infantry took shelter in a disabled armored vehicle in western Andriivka, indicating that Russian troops had recaptured the hamlet. GSAFU reported that Russian attempts to cross the canal at Kurdyumivka were unsuccessful. Fighting continued in the Toretsk-New York AO, with only small changes to the line of conflict. Russian forces expanded their area of control in eastern Toretsk, but made no new advances toward the high rises in the city center or the coal mine complex to the south. Russian forces have also fallen back to the southern edge of New York at Nelipivka, or equally possible, Russian gains were overstated after last week's advance by a squad of mechanized armor into Leonidivka. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, fighting remains heavy in the Pokrovsk AO, but compared to the previous week, the operational tempo has dropped by half. Ukrainian forces continue to hold the north flank. Russian troops in Krutyi Yar were attacked by drones, confirming the advance reported last week. GSAFU reported that Russian troops continued their attempts to advance toward Lysivka from the area of the coal mine in Novogrodivka. From the Kurakhove AO, Russian forces continued to advance towards Selidove using the railroad grade. At least a platoon of Russian mechanized armor tried to reach the settlement using the road from Ukrainsk, but were forced back. Heavy fighting also continued in the Kurakhove AO. The line of conflict was clarified in Zhelanne Persha, where Russian forces remain on the northern edge of the village. Fighting continued north of Tsukurine and Hirnik. GSAFU reported that Russian attempts to advance toward Alexandropol, the one east of Kurakhove, and deeper into Maximilianivka were unsuccessful. The VKS bombed the bridge that crosses the Kurakhove reservoir between Kurakhove and Berestki, disrupting Ukrainian logistics. The low-quality video provided enough intelligence to confirm the strike, but the amount of damage is unclear. 7 Russian soldiers attempting to surrender to the Ukrainian 33rd Brigade were attacked by their own artillery after they started following instructions issued by a drone. Only one survived. Everything is going to plan. In the Vuhledar AO, Ukrainian forces continue to hold the settlement, and the operational tempo has inexplicably slowed. Russian sources made multiple false claims that Ukrainian forces in Vuhledar have been fully encircled. We're unsure why Ukrainians haven't withdrawn, and equally unsure when Russian forces appear to have scaled back their attacks. The International Atomic Energy Agency provided an update on the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The on-site team of inspectors, quote, heard explosions throughout the week, including several blasts close to the site, although no damage to the plant was reported. On September the 20th, Russian occupiers claimed that a drone struck the 35.6 kV electrical substation approximately 300 meters from the NPP. The substation provides electricity to non-safety-related facilities, including a grid water pumping station, a water management plant, and external warehouses. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi reported, quote, visiting the affected site the day following the alleged attack, the IAEA team observed some impact on one of the substation's 2 transformers. Remains of batteries and metal pieces of the alleged drone were also observed in the area. The plant said repairs are still ongoing. The NPP staff was informed that they would not be permitted to conduct a planned inspection of the external warehouses and diesel fuel storage facility, quote, due to the risk from military activities. Inspectors walked through the turbine halls of reactor units 3 and 4, but were not permitted to access the western parts of the buildings. The IAEA also observed the monthly changeover of cooling pumps in the spent fuel pool at Reactor 5. On Saturday, Ukraine launched up to 125 drones targeting the Volgograd, Rostov, Belgorod, Voronezh, Krasnodar, Bryansk and Kursk regions of Russia. A drone struck the Yeysk military airfield in Krasnodar Krai, although we cannot confirm reports that Kinzhal missiles were destroyed. A large fire erupted adjacent to the arsenal in Kotlubань in the Volgograd Oblast, but satellite images show that drone debris landed to the north of the ammunition depot. Russian sources claim the Millerovo military airfield in Rostov Oblast was attacked, but it was unclear if there was major damage. A large fire broke out at the 43rd Long-Range Aviation Combat Employment and Retraining Center near Dubrovichi in the Ryazan region. The source of the fire is unknown, but does not appear to be related to a Ukrainian attack. And near Kinel in the Samara Oblast, the railroad bridge suffered light damage in an apparent sabotage attempt by partisans. No one has claimed responsibility for the blast. Here is the weekend theater-wide update. Breaking news: somebody needs to change the sign. It's been 0 days since a Russian government official threatened nuclear war. Speaking with the Russian state media agency TASS, the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, threatened to attack smaller NATO alliance nations, implying that the nuclear powers of the United Kingdom, France and the United States might not retaliate. In what should be a shock to no one, the recent United States Department of Justice indictment against 2 Russians outlined how Moscow planned to use nuclear threats to derail Ukrainian aid. 6 weeks after expanding its war of aggression and the Russian defeat at the Battle of Kyiv, a meeting was held with autocrat Vladimir Putin's chief of staff, Sergei Kiriyenko, on how to accelerate Russia's propaganda efforts directed at the West. He said that the number one priority was to create a, quote, nuclear psychosis, unquote, among Ukraine's allies. 12 countries, including BRICS nations China, Brazil, South Africa and Egypt, issued a joint statement against the continued threats to use nuclear weapons. Quote, "We call on refraining from the use of the threat of weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons and chemical and biological weapons." It also emphasized that civilian infrastructure, including, quote, peaceful nuclear facilities and other energy installations, should not be targets of military operations. The declaration didn't mention Russia by name, but was released after numerous Russian officials made nuclear threats last week. On Friday, Russia reportedly launched 3 Kh-47M2 Kinzhal air-to-surface ballistic missiles at Starokostantyniv military airfield in the Khmelnytsky Oblast, with follow-up attacks on Saturday. Claims of the airfield's destruction and the cratering of the runway are false. "We are not breaking operational security. You can see it for yourself on Sentinel Hub." Sky News reported that since 2023, a company in China has been providing direct lethal aid to Russia, including aiding in the production of first-person view one-way drones. An unnamed Western official confirmed a Reuters Thompson report. The White House said they were concerned about the development, but there was nothing to suggest that the Chinese government was aware of or supporting the, quote, alleged transactions. Almost 24 volunteers who support the Mriya report released an open letter declaring they were resigning due to, quote, various ethical concerns that, quote, came to our attention and led each of us to conclude, individually and collectively, to cut ties with Mriya report. No details were given. The group is going to launch a new channel called Volya Radio. Ukrainian drone operators have been forced to extract the explosives from Russian darts to make charges for one-way drones due to shortages. Vadim Mazevich, a former commander of the UAV battalion of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, told the United States news agency Newsweek that Ukrainian forces are, quote, very short on explosive substances. Sergei Varakin, the commander of a drone unit under Ukraine's 58th Brigade, called the situation, quote, quite a long-standing problem. In a new white paper, the Helsinki Commission, created in 1976, appealed for the United States to abandon its post-Cold War approach of détente to Russia and officially recognize Moscow as a persistent threat to global security. The report, which has not been released to the public, calls for ensuring Ukraine's victory against Russia by providing massive military and humanitarian assistance for Kyiv and allowing deep strikes into Russia with US-provided weapons. The Royal Netherlands Air Force officially retired their remaining fleet of F-16 fighter planes, which will be transferred to Ukraine by the end of 2024. Our War Crimes and Human Rights section can cover difficult topics, including torture, gender-based violence, war crimes, and violence against children. Today's report does not include graphic content. Russian drone attacked the city of Sumy, striking a hospital and apartment buildings, killing at least 10, wounding 22, and forcing 113 patients to be relocated. Police Colonel Igor Polyadych was killed in a double-tag attack while coordinating the rescue effort from the first strike on the hospital. That's the audio from a video that captured the moment of the second drone strike on the hospital. On Friday, a Russian attack struck apartment buildings and the Europlaza shopping mall in Kramatorsk, killing at least 2 and wounding 12. There were no military or industrial targets in the area. A Russian drone struck a civilian vehicle delivering humanitarian aid in the Kharkiv region, killing Supreme Court Judge Leonid Loboyko and wounding 3 women. Russia attacked a marked civilian ambulance going to Sudzha in the Kursk Oblast to evacuate a wounded civilian, killing the driver and a medic and critically wounding a 3rd member of the medical team. From September the 1st to the 26th, Russia has used 2,170 one-way drones to target civilians in the Kherson Oblast, roughly 80 a day. Through the period, at least 6 civilians have been killed and 110 wounded. Residents are forced to use buildings and trees for cover for basic survival tasks such as buying groceries or receiving humanitarian aid. The IAEA reported significant military activity in the area of Ukraine's operating nuclear power plants. Reactor 2 of the South Ukraine nuclear power plant was moved to cold shutdown on September the 19th to repair the electric motor to one of the main cooling pumps, which was damaged by a power surge caused by the August the 26th Russian attack on Ukraine's electrical grid. On September the 18th, IAEA inspectors at the plant had to take shelter due to the presence of Shahed 136 one-way drones in the area, including one that flew over the plant. Another 15 drones passed close to the plant on September the 19th, 2 on September the 20th, and 8 on September the 21st. On September the 22nd, an air raid alert was issued at the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant, followed by anti-aircraft fire and a, quote, large explosion. The State Nuclear Regulatory Inspectorate of Ukraine notified the IAEA that the Eastern Nuclear and Radiation Safety Inspection Regional Unit Office, located in the city of Kharkiv, was damaged in a Russian attack. On September the 29th, Russia released a video showing an intentional drone strike on the 330 kV substation in Marhanets in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, which is connected to one of 2 external power supply lines to the NPP. At the time of publication, there were no reports of the 330 kV line at the NPP being disconnected. Last week, President Zelensky warned the United Nations that Russia intends to target the electrical substations that provide external power to at least 3 of Ukraine's nuclear power facilities. We never end a podcast on war crimes, so once again it's a visit to the land of Mobics, mobilization and mir. Colonel Alexei Kolomeitsev, the head of the 924th State Center in Moscow, which trains Shahed 136 one-way drone operators, was apparently assassinated in the suburb of Kolomna. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack. This should surprise no one. Our favorite FSB colonel, convicted war criminal, convicted Russian criminal, failed Mobic and original Little Green Man, the first Minister of Defense of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, Igor Strelkov-Girkin, has developed a severe heart condition. His lawyer is demanding he be transferred to a hospital. Girkin reportedly is suffering from angina attacks, including shortness of breath, and he is losing the use of his left hand. Russian state media agency SHOT reported that Girkin may require heart bypass or stent surgery, which will not be available to him as a prisoner. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.